Welcome to a story of how humans have impacted the natural world, a history of the exploited behaviours of our ancestors and ourselves that have sent the Earth into a human-caused meltdown. Our story begins around 7 million years ago in Chad with Sahelanthropus chadensis, the oldest known hominin species that represents our earliest ancestor after we split from the chimpanzee lineage. Not much is known about this species, but it has been predicted that it had a mainly plant-based diet relying on the fruits, nuts and seeds that the plants at the time would have produced. However, with likely very low population numbers, this species' impact on the environment would have been limited to the low-scale consumption of this plant material. This minimal impact continued for over 3.5 million years, until a recent discovery in Ethiopia found evidence of our ancestors using stone tools from around 3.4 million years ago. The hominin species that was likely using tools at this time was Australopithecus afarensis, who would have used the stone tools to remove flesh and access bone marrow from animals that were likely already dead, rather than having been actively hunted. From around 2.6 million years ago, the stone tools had developed into hammerstones and stone flakes. These were used by Homo habilis, suitably nicknamed the handyman. These tools played a part in the successful migrations out of Africa, with the first migrations occurring 1.8 million years ago, with Homo erectus and Homo ergaster moving into areas of the Middle East, Georgia and East Asia. So now our ancestors' small impact on the environment was slightly more widespread. The tools became even more sophisticated from 1.6 million years ago and onwards, with hand axes and picks allowing our ancestors to further exploit the plants and animals around them, making their hunter-gatherer lifestyle far more profitable. However, low population sizes limited the impact they could have on the environment. Also around 1.6 million years ago, we found evidence in Kenya that shows our ancestors' first experiences of controlling fire, a major factor in the environmental alteration. However, it isn't until later, around 400,000 years ago, that evidence of fire becomes far more common. By this time, our ancestors had also spread to Western Europe, and fire was being used all over Europe, the Middle East, Africa, as well as Asia. Controlling fire let our ancestors be able to modify their tools, creating more effective weapons for hunting prey. Fires could also be used to clear areas of land and to drive prey out of dense grasses. Populations were still comparably low, however, with estimates of 5 to 9 million human-like individuals across the planet, with 250 km² being required for every 3 hunter-gatherers. However, early humans exploited their improved hunting techniques and knowledge of fire, enabling them to spread further to Australia and the Americas, but this also resulted in the extinction of many large mammal species that weren't accustomed to human presence and so weren't well defended against their attacks. Humans likely caused the extinction of at least 24 large mammal species in Africa, 50 large mammal species in the Americas, 85% of Australia's large mammals, and 29% of large mammal genera in Europe. It is estimated that approximately 1 billion large animals were lost across the planet, which permanently altered ecosystems and their food chains, with apex predators and top herbivores being lost. Nutrient cycles were interrupted, the incidence of natural fires increased, and environments were dramatically transformed. For example, the mammoth steppes in Europe. Once the herbivorous species were lost here, the diverse steppes turned into waterlogged tundras covered in unpalatable plant species. As this period of extinction came to a close around 10,000 years ago, humans were gradually domesticating crops and animals in what can be considered one of the most significant events in our evolutionary past and a foundation of our modern civilization, the development of agriculture. Crop domestication originated in several locations independently around 10,000 years ago, with plant species including wheat, maize and many others being among the first to be domesticated, which basically means they were altered from their wild variety to a version with traits that benefited humans. Animals were also being deliberately reared and utilised by humans, but for different purposes. In fact, there is evidence for dogs being domesticated from grey wolves as far back as 40,000 years ago. Domestication allowed humans to shift from this hunter-gatherer lifestyle to a more agricultural farmer lifestyle. This gave them a more stable and predictable source of food, enabling less time spent hunting and more time advancing their cultures and becoming increasingly successful. This transition was coupled with a great population increase, with global population estimated to surpass 50 million shortly after this first agricultural revolution. 2,500 people could now occupy a 250 km² area, compared to the 3 people before the development of agriculture. There was a role reversal, with humans going from being predominantly under the control of the environment to humans controlling the natural world around them. The spread of agriculture and the associated population increases led to the removal of huge biodiverse areas in order to create land suitable for growing crops and to construct settlements. Through this deforestation and soil disturbance, humans caused an increase in atmospheric carbon dioxide between 8,000 and 2,000 years ago as agriculture spread and intensified. As the number of livestock kept by humans increased and China and India began cultivating rice using an irrigation method, methane emissions also increased. These carbon dioxide and methane increases equated to a climate warming of around 0.8 degrees C. This was enough to prevent the planet entering another ice age, which is why some people consider this the beginning of anthropogenic climate change. The intensification of agriculture and the associated population increases eventually led to people manufacturing novel technologies that would allow a sustained food production for the estimated 800 million humans that lived on Earth by the mid-1700s. This facilitated what is now known as the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution began in Manchester around 1760, where machinery began to replace manual labour, factories were constructed, and many different manufactured goods became mass-produced. Fossil fuels such as coal were used to power the new technologies, and they also assisted in the development of transportation on both land and water. Within 100 years of the Industrial Revolution beginning, the human population exceeded 1 billion, and as another 100 years passed, the global population had exploded to 2.5 billion. This was coupled with the increased demand for both natural and man-made materials, the increased use of fossil fuels, and the increased demand for land to house these extra people. It was during the Industrial Revolution that air pollution became a nationwide issue in Britain, with nitrous oxides, sulphur oxides, as well as ash being released from factories and becoming a component of the air. Animal and plant species suffered as well, and in particular, important peatlands became heavily degraded. The sewage and industrial waste that was drained into the waterways was responsible for the disappearance of salmon and other fish species, as it made the rivers virtually uninhabitable. The revolution of industrial-scale mining was another ecological catastrophe, being incredibly damaging to the environment, with deforestation and soil degradation both direct consequences. By the end of the 19th century, industrialisation had spread through Europe, with Belgium, France, Germany and Sweden the next industrial countries, followed by the USA and Japan. Economies and societies flourished and standards of living increased for many people. However, this was again at the expense of the natural environment. Compared to 1700, global environments in 1850 following the Industrial Revolution were much different. Forests and woodlands, savannas and grasslands, and shrublands all decreased in global area. This can be blamed on the spread of industry, but also the continued spread of agriculture. Fast forward to 2018 and we're faced with the current condition of the Earth and its natural environments. It took our species nearly 200,000 years to reach a population of 2.5 billion. However, in the past just 70 years, this has tripled to over 7.6 billion. Humans are now abundant on every continent, and on each of these continents they can be considered the dominant species, using about 25% of the usable chemical energy produced by ecosystems around the globe. In fact, humans' catastrophic impact on nearly every terrestrial and marine ecosystem found on Earth, as well as the changes they have caused to the composition of the atmosphere, have led to many thinking we've entered a new geological epoch, the Anthropocene. It is now estimated that we've modified over 50% of the entire terrestrial surface of the Earth, transforming land for human benefit, which removes necessary habitat for a broad range of animals, and it directly destroys vegetation. Deforestation is occurring at a rate where an area half the size of England is lost each year, leading to habitat loss being recognised as the most severe threat to life on Earth. And human impact is not limited to terrestrial areas. 97.7% of the world's ocean is affected by multiple anthropogenic stresses. These include human-caused climate change, which itself has caused sea surface temperature rises, and ocean acidification from the increased amount of carbon dioxide absorbed, causing a pH decline of 0.1 pH units. Fishing, which removes 80 million tonnes of fish from the ocean per year, the abundant shipping routes, and offshore and coastal developments are also important problems, but these are shadowed by the issue of pollution. An estimated 8 million metric tonnes of plastic enters our ocean each year, with 250,000 tonnes of it floating on the surface, accumulating in garbage patches in the North Atlantic and North Pacific. These impacts are affecting all life in the oceans, from reducing the primary production of marine phytoplankton to the 650,000 marine mammals that are killed through bycatch each year. In fact, the planet is actually heading towards a mass extinction. There have been 5 of these in Earth's history, each caused by substantial physical processes or bolide impacts. However, it's a single species, humans, causing this next one. Humans' impact on animals has been so intense that current extinction rate is estimated to be up to 1,000 times greater than the natural background rate of extinction. As well as the land transformations mentioned earlier, humans are introducing foreign pests that outcompete native species, exploiting more natural resources, leaving less for other species, directly killing species, and changing the global climate to an extent where all aspects of a species' life are affected. From the increased ultraviolet radiation affecting fish larvae development and survival, to temperature affecting the distribution and contracting the ranges of many terrestrial, freshwater, and marine species. In fact, atmospheric carbon dioxide concentrations have increased by 45% since pre-industrial levels, mainly due to the fact that we're now emitting around 40 billion tonnes of carbon dioxide per year. There are even worries we're approaching a tipping point, where the impact we're having on the planet currently will soon force the natural world into a series of positive feedback loops, exponentially increasing the rate the planet degrades. So, from what can be considered the beginning of human history with Sahelanthropus chidensis to modern day humans, our behaviour has created an unrecognisable planet, with a lot of the impacts unfortunately irreversible. But interestingly, while humans now have the power to seemingly degrade all aspects of the natural world, they also have the power to protect and conserve it. Environments across the planet are being adapted and restored, threatened animal species are being protected, and some are even recovering. Alternatives to fossil fuels are becoming increasingly common, and people are becoming more environmentally conscious, while political policies are changing the way countries act towards the natural world, and ambitious targets have been set by the United Nations. This conservation movement is becoming more widespread and active, but efforts must be drastically increased and become more global should humans hope to maintain an inhabitable planet.